You will salute me when I pass." The voice carried down the whole length of the state avenue, over the drums, over the slow grind of the carriage wheels on the old stone, and it landed on Aldrin Voss the way a thrown glove lands, meant to be felt, meant to be seen by everyone watching. I was posted 6 paces to his left, at the corner of the reviewing dais, and I heard it as clearly as he did. So did the 200 people pressed against the rope lines. So did the band, which faltered for half a beat before the drum major dragged it back into time. I have stood beside Aldrin Voss for 11 years. I have seen him not move while a man screamed in his face, and while a horse panicked at his shoulder, and once while a roof tile fell from the gatehouse and shattered a foot from his boot. I knew before the prince finished the sentence that the prince had picked the wrong morning, the wrong avenue, and very much the wrong guardsman. He did not know it yet. He thought he had picked a statue. My name is Corwin Tate, and I am telling you this because I was close enough to watch a small, vain man learn what a salute actually is, and to watch him learn it in front of 2 crowns, 4 ambassadors, and a city that does not forget a thing. It was the morning of the Accord procession. 3 days of treaty talks between our house and the House of Marin had ended in a signed accord, and the procession was the public face of it. The visiting royal party carried in open carriages down the State Avenue from the river gate to the palace forecourt, our own colors and theirs flying side by side, the whole long ceremonial spine of the city lined with guardsmen at attention. I had drawn the dais corner. Voss had drawn the post directly at the foot of the dais steps, the most watched position on the route, because the sergeant of the watch trusted him to be the most still man in the kingdom for 90 unbroken minutes. That was the job. Stand. Hold. Let the great and the powerful flow past you like water past a piling, and do not so much as blink at the wrong moment. The Marin party came down the avenue in good order. The old king of Marin first, white-bearded and gracious, lifting one hand to the crowds, his chancellor behind him, his 2 daughters who waved like people who actually liked being waved at, and then in the last carriage, alone because he had insisted on it, Prince Hallex. I had heard about Prince Hallex before I ever saw him. Every guardsman on the route had. The talk in the watchroom for 3 days had been that the youngest son of Marin was clever and charming at the treaty table, and absolutely insufferable away from it, that he had made a footman cry over a spilled cup, that he had ordered the Rivergate banners rehung twice because the wind displeased him, that he believed the world was a room arranged for his comfort, and that anyone in it who was not comfortable was furniture. None of that is a crime. Plenty of powerful men are difficult. But difficult men in a foreign country usually have the sense to be difficult quietly. Hallex did not. His carriage reached the dais and slowed, as all the carriages slowed, so that the riders could acknowledge our king on the reviewing stand above. Our king rose as he had risen for the old king of Marin and inclined his head, a courtesy between equals, crown to crown, the proper thing. Hallex returned it lazily, and then instead of riding on, he did something none of the others had done. He rapped the side of his carriage with his knuckles, and his driver stopped. He had seen Voss. I watched it happen. I watched the prince's eye travel down the dais steps and snag on the guardsman at the bottom, the immaculate red tunic, the tall black bearskin, the white gloves crossed at the rifle, the eyes fixed on nothing and everything. And I watched something curdle in the prince's face, because a man like Hallex cannot bear a still thing. A still man is a man not looking at him, not impressed by him, not arranged for him. To Hallex, Voss's stillness was an insult that had been standing there the whole time, waiting to be corrected. "Guardsman," the prince leaned out of the carriage, "you at the steps." Voss did not move. He was not being defiant. He was being exactly what he was ordered to be. A sentry on ceremonial post does not turn his head for a passenger in a carriage, not for a duke, not for a prince, not for anyone below the crown he serves. That is not pride. That is the whole point of the post, that it cannot be commanded by whoever happens to be passing, because the moment it can, it is worth nothing. The prince did not know that or did not care. He raised his voice, and that is when the whole avenue heard it. "You will salute me when I pass." The drums faltered, the crowd's murmur died. And in the great new silence, I saw the old king of Marin, 3 carriages ahead, slowly turn his white head to look back at his son. And I saw our own king go very still on the dais above, not the trained stillness of a guardsman, the worst kind, the stillness of a host watching a guest make a mess on his floor. Voss did not salute. A salute, you understand, is not a wave. It is not a greeting you hand out to whoever demands one. In our service, a sentry on the line renders the salute to exactly one authority, his own sovereign, and the colors of his own house. He does not render it to foreign royalty during a procession. The courtesy between the crowns has already been paid up on the dais, crown to crown, where it belongs. For a sentry to break post and salute a visiting prince in the middle of the route would not be respect. It would be the opposite. It would be telling the whole watching city that this man, this passenger, outranked the king on the stand. It would hand Halleck's an honor that belonged to our king alone, an honor that was not the prince's to demand and not Voss's to give. I knew all of this in my bones because I had stood the same post 100 times. Halleck's knew none of it. To him, a soldier was a soldier, and a salute was a salute, and a prince was a prince, and a prince who said salute and got nothing had been disobeyed by furniture. Did you hear me? The carriage door was open now. The prince was half out of it, one boot on the step, his face going from white to a blotched red I could see from 6 paces. I said, "You will salute. Are you deaf? Or do they not teach manners to the toy soldiers here?" Toy soldier. I felt the word go through the line of guardsmen like a wind through wheat. Not one of us moved, but every one of us heard it. Voss's eyes did not flicker. His gloved hands did not tighten on the rifle. He breathed, slow and even, the way they teach you to breathe when the whole weight of a thing is on you, and the only move is to not move at all. And the prince, getting nothing, did the thing that turned a rude moment into the kind of story a city tells for a generation. He stepped down out of the carriage, in the middle of the State Avenue, in front of both crowns, and he walked toward my friend. There is a thing that happens to a crowd when a powerful man does something foolish. It does not cheer and it does not boo. It holds its breath. 200 people on the rope lines went silent all at once, and the only sounds left on the whole avenue were the prince's boots on the stone, and somewhere far back, a child asking its mother what was happening. I will tell you what I was doing in that moment because it matters. I was thinking through the orders. A guardsman on ceremonial post is not a free man. He is a man held inside a very narrow set of rules, and in a moment like this, those rules are the only thing that saves you. The rule was, hold post. The rule was, a sentry does not yield his post, does not turn, does not speak, does not engage. The rule was also, a sentry meets a threat to his person or his post with the minimum force required and not 1 ounce more. Those 2 rules were about to be pulled in opposite directions, and the man they were going to be pulled apart on was standing 4 feet from me, not blinking. The prince stopped in front of Voss. He was a head shorter, and he tipped his chin up to make up for it. And up close I could see he was younger than I'd thought, not a boy, but not far past one, with the soft hands of a man who had never carried anything heavier than his own opinion. "I am Prince Halleck of the House of Marin," he said slowly, as though Voss were simple, "a guest of your king. When I command you, you obey. Salute me." Voss looked through him, not past him in contempt, through him, the way you look at the middle distance when your eyes are forward and a man has walked into the space they happen to be pointing. His face held nothing. No anger, no fear, no satisfaction. 11 years I had stood beside that face and I still could not always read it, and I knew it better than my own. The prince's hand came up. I think, looking back, that he meant only to seize Voss by the front of the tunic, to shake the statue, to force a reaction the way a child shakes a clock that has stopped. I do not think he had a plan past that. Men like Halleck's rarely plan past the moment they expect the world to rearrange itself around their wanting. But a hand reaching for a guardsman's tunic on the State Avenue is a hand laid on the king's own colors, and that is a different thing entirely, and Voss knew it before the hand had moved 6 inches. What Voss did, he did so cleanly that half the crowd never understood it had happened. He did not strike. He did not shove. His left hand came off the rifle and met the prince's wrist, not a blow, a catch, the way you catch a falling cup, and he simply held it, stopped it in the air. The prince's reaching hand froze a hand's breadth from the brass buttons, caught in a white glove, going nowhere. And Voss spoke. One sentence, low, pitched for the prince alone, though I was close enough to hear every word. "I cannot give you what is not mine to give, your highness." Then he let go. He returned his hand to the rifle. He fixed his eyes forward. And he stood, exactly as before, as if nothing at all had occurred, except that the Prince of Marin was now standing in the middle of a state procession with his arm still half raised and absolutely nowhere to put it. I have never seen a man so completely undone by being touched so gently. Halleck had come down out of his carriage expecting a fight or a grovel. Either would have suited him. Either would have made him the center of the avenue, the prince who tamed the toy soldier. What he got instead was a single firm hand and a single quiet sentence that did not insult him, did not refuse him in anger, but simply, calmly, immovably, informed him that he had asked for something he had no right to. There is no answer to that. You cannot bluster against it. You cannot demand louder. The man had not even raised his voice. The prince's face was doing several things at once. He pulled his arm back as if the glove had burned him. He looked up at the dais, at our king, and I watched him understand for the first time that he had an audience, and that the audience had not enjoyed the show. He looked back at his father's carriage, 3 lengths ahead, and the old king of Marin was watching him with an expression I would not have wanted aimed at me. The weary, public shame of a father whose son has embarrassed the family in another man's house. "What," the prince said, and his voice cracked on it, "did you say to me?" Voss said nothing more. He had said the only thing the post allowed him to say, and he would not say it twice. That, too, is the discipline, knowing that the second sentence is always weaker than the first, that a man who explains himself to a bully has already started to lose. It was our sergeant of the watch who moved next, and I want to be fair to him, because he handled it the way the whole service would later say it should be handled. Sergeant Hollies came down the dais steps at a measured pace, not running, never running, because a running guardsman tells a crowd that something has gone wrong, and he placed himself at Voss's shoulder, facing the prince, and he rendered the prince a short, correct bow. The bow a host's officer owes a guest, not a salute, a bow. "Your Highness," Hollies said, "may I escort you back to your carriage? The procession is waiting." It was perfectly done. It gave the prince a way out. It told him, without a single discourteous word, that he had reached the end of what he would be permitted to do on this avenue, and that the kindest thing left for him was to get back in his carriage and let the wheels carry him away from the worst morning of his life. A wiser man would have taken it. A wiser man would have nodded, climbed back up, and let the city forget him by suppertime. Prince Halleck was not that morning a wiser man. "He laid hands on me," the prince said, loudly enough for the rope lines again. He pointed at Voss with a shaking finger. "You all saw it. This servant laid hands on a Prince of Marin. I want him arrested. I want him stripped of that uniform he is not fit to wear, now." And there it was, the demand that would either end my friend's career or end the prince's pride, and I did not yet know which, because the only man who could decide it was sitting 1 flight of steps above us, and he had not yet said a word. Our king is not a loud man. In 11 years of standing within earshot of him, I had heard him raise his voice exactly once, and that was at a fire. He is the kind of king who lets a silence do his arguing for him, and the silence he let fall now was the longest 20 seconds of my life. The whole avenue waited. The prince waited, breathing hard, his pointing finger beginning to droop, because no one had leapt to obey it. The old king of Marin had stepped down from his own carriage now, and was coming back along the line on his chancellor's arm, slowly, an old man hurrying as best he could toward a fire his son had set. Then our king rose from the reviewing chair and came to the rail of the dais, and he looked down at the whole tableau, the prince, the still guardsman, the sergeant between them, and he spoke in an ordinary voice that carried because everything else had gone so quiet. "Prince Hallex," he said, "you have asked my sentry to render you a salute." "I ordered it," the prince said, "and he—" "You asked," the king repeated gently, and the correction was so mild and so total that the prince actually shut his mouth. "Let me explain to you, as a host to a guest, what you asked for. That man at the foot of my steps renders the salute to one authority on this avenue, to me, to the colors of my house. Not because I am grander than your father, I am not. We met as equals on this stand not 5 minutes ago, and gladly. He does not salute you for the same reason he would not salute me if I were a guest riding through Marin. The salute of a sentry on the line is the one honor in my kingdom that cannot be bought, cannot be commanded by a passerby, and cannot be given away, not by him, not by his sergeant, not by me. If he had saluted you when you demanded it, he would have told this entire city that a visiting prince outranks the king of this house on the king's own avenue. He refused you in order to honor me. Do you understand what I am telling you? He was being more loyal to the courtesy between our two crowns than you were." I watched the words land. I watched the prince's face change from outrage to confusion to something rower and younger underneath both, because there is a particular horror that comes over a proud man at the exact moment he realizes he has been wrong out loud, in public, in front of his father, and cannot take a syllable of it back. "He caught my arm," the prince said, but it came out small now, almost a question. "You reached for the front of his tunic," the king said. "For my colors. He stopped your hand without striking you, without shoving you, without raising his voice, and he set it down again, and then he stood his post. I have watched the whole thing from this rail. So have your father's ambassadors. So have 200 of my people, and I should think a fair number of theirs." He paused. "If you wish, I will have him arrested. I will strip him of that uniform, as you say. And then I will explain to your father, and to the accord we signed 3 days ago, that I have punished the most disciplined man on my watch for the crime of refusing to dishonor his king, at the demand of his king's guest. Shall I have it written that way? It is the only true way it could be written." The prince said nothing. There was nothing to say. The trap had not been built by anyone. He had walked into it carrying it himself. I should tell you who was watching this, because it is the whole reason it mattered. The State Avenue on Accord morning is not a private place. Lined along the dais, and at the windows of the embassy houses stood the envoys of 4 great houses, men and women whose single trade is reading the strength of a kingdom from small signs. How its servants stand, whether its soldiers can be bent, what its king will do when a guest insults his lowest sentry in front of the world. Every one of them had heard the demand. Every one of them was now watching to see whether our king would sell his own guardsmen to smooth a ruffled prince, or hold the line at the foot of his own steps. A treaty is only as good as the spine of the house that signs it, and the whole of that spine was, at that instant, a single still man in a red tunic, and the watching courts knew it even before our king had finished speaking. I saw the ambassador of the sea houses lean to her secretary and murmur something, never taking her eyes from Voss, and I did not need to hear it to know she had just revised, upward, exactly what our word was worth. It was then that the old king of Marin reached the foot of the dais, and what he did next is the part of the story I have never been able to tell without something tightening in my chest. He did not scold his son. He did not apologize for him, not first. The old king walked past the prince as though the prince were not there at all, and he went and stood in front of Aldrin Voss, in front of a foreign sentry he had never met, and he looked up into that still, forward-staring face for a long moment. And then the king of Marin, sovereign of his own great house, took off his hat. "Guardsman," he said, "I have served 50 years on a throne, and I have never once seen a soldier refuse a king's son so well that the refusal was the most honorable thing on the field. You did not insult my boy. You taught him. I am sorry it had to be in front of so many, and I am grateful it was you." He turned his head just slightly toward our own king on the dais. "Your house is well kept, brother. A kingdom is only ever as strong as the men who will not bend their posts for a passing fool, even when the fool is a prince, especially then." He put his hat back on. He turned to his son, and only then, with the whole avenue watching, did the old man's face go hard. "Alex, get back in the carriage. We will speak tonight about what a salute is, since plainly no one in my house has ever made it clear to you. And tomorrow, before we leave this city, you are going to do a thing that will be very difficult for you, and you are going to do it well." He did not say what the thing was. He did not have to. The prince had already gone the color of ash. But that is getting ahead of the morning, and I do not want to rush past the part where my friend, having upended a prince and earned the bared head of a king, simply went back to standing still, because that, in the end, is the whole of who Aldrin Voss is, and the city did not yet know the half of it. The procession resumed. The drum major found his time. The carriages rolled on up the avenue to the palace forecourt, the colors flying side by side, and the prince's carriage rolled with them, the curtain now drawn tight on the side that faced the crowds. Voss stood his post for the remaining hour without one further flicker, as though the most talked-about minute of the year had happened to some other man entirely. When the last carriage passed and the order to stand down finally came, he turned, presented his rifle to the sergeant for inspection, and walked off the avenue at the regulation pace, and a third of the crowd applauded him, and he gave them nothing, because the post does not end until you are off the stone and behind the wall, and Aldrin Voss has never once shortchanged a post by a single second in his life. By the time I reached the wall, the news had already outrun me. That is the thing about a state procession. It is not a private moment. It is the most public thing a city does, and 4 ambassadors and a wall of crowns had watched a foreign prince demand a salute and be refused so cleanly that the refusal had drawn the bared head of his own father. The ambassador of a third house, a sharp old woman who missed nothing, was overheard at the forecourt reception, saying that she had learned more about the strength of our king in those 2 minutes than in 3 days of treaty talks, that a kingdom whose lowest sentry could not be made to bend by a prince was a kingdom whose word at a table could be trusted. The accord we had signed, men said afterward, was worth a little more that afternoon than it had been that morning, and the difference had been bought by a man standing still at the foot of some steps, refusing to lift his hand. I did not know any of that yet. I only knew that I had to find Voss. I caught up with him in the watch room. He was sitting on the long bench, unbuckling his chin strap, and the other men were giving him a wide and respectful berth, the way you give a man room when he has done something you are not sure you could have done yourself. Young Renick, who had stood his first procession that morning 2 posts down, kept opening his mouth to ask something and shutting it again, until finally he could not hold it. "Sergeant Voss," the boy said, "how did you know? How did you know not to salute? I think I might have. With a prince screaming at me and the whole avenue watching, I think I might have just lifted my hand to make it stop." Voss looked at him for a long moment, and the room went quiet, because every man on that bench had wondered the same thing about himself. "Then you'd have learned what I learned, but later and worse," Voss said. "You don't decide it in the moment, Renick. That's the mistake. In the moment your blood is up and the noise is loud and every part of you wants the easy thing. You decide it now on this bench today while no one is shouting. You decide once cold that the salute is not yours to give away, and you make it a thing you have already done so that when the prince screams there is nothing left to decide. The standing is easy. The deciding is the whole war, and you fight it in quiet rooms like this one, years before anyone tests you." He buckled his kit closed. "Decide now. Then you'll never have to wonder if you would have lifted your hand. You'll already know you wouldn't. The boy nodded slowly, and I watched him put it away somewhere deep, the way you store the rare true things, and I thought, that is how it passes down. Not in the orders, not on the avenue. On a bench, from a tired old man to a frightened young one the day after. You held his wrist, I said, sitting down beside him. You actually put a glove on a foreign prince. Do you have any idea? I know exactly what I did, Corwin. He set the bearskin on the bench between us. Without it, he looked older, tired, ordinary, a man of 50 with gray coming in hard at the temples. I caught a hand that was reaching for the colors. It is in the standing orders, paragraph and line. I could recite it to you. I have recited it to recruits. I never expected to do it to a man in a crown. He wanted you arrested. He did, Voss almost smiled. And for about 4 seconds I thought I might be. He looked at his white gloves still on his hands, faintly gray now from the morning. You want to know the truth of it. The hardest part was not the catch. The hardest part was not saluting him in the first place. Do you understand that? When a man that angry stands in front of you and screams for a salute, every instinct you have wants to give him the smallest possible thing that will make him go away. Just lift the hand, just an inch, end it. Make the noise stop. He shook his head slowly. That is the whole job, Corwin. The job is not the standing. Anyone can learn to stand. The job is being the one man on the avenue who will not give a frightened, furious prince the easy thing he is screaming for. Because the easy thing would have been a lie, and the king was watching, and the king deserved the truth even from the bottom of his own steps. I have thought about that sentence for years. The easy thing would have been a lie. There is a whole philosophy of duty folded up in it, and Voss said it the way other men say they are going to get a cup of tea. I should tell you here, the thing the city did not know that morning, and that I only half knew myself, because it changes how you hear everything that came after. Aldrin Voss had not always stood at the foot of ceremonial steps. 20 years before the Accord procession, he had been a line soldier in a war we do not name on the avenue, and he had been at a river crossing that went very badly, and he had carried 2 wounded men out of it across his shoulders and gone back for a third and not found him in time. He never spoke of it. I knew it only because I had once seen the ribbon, folded away in his kit, that the kingdom gives to men who do that sort of thing, and because when I asked him about it he had said 4 words, I lost the third, and then nothing else ever again. He had asked to leave the line after that war. He had asked specifically for the most ceremonial, most uneventful, most standstill post in the whole service, and the service which understood had given it to him. So when I tell you that Aldrin Voss did not flinch at a screaming prince, understand what I am telling you. The prince's rage was the smallest whether that man had ever stood in. He had stood in worse and lost more and learned on a riverbank exactly what a thing is worth that you cannot get back, and the salute he refused that morning was, to him, exactly that kind of thing. An honor that, once given to the wrong man for the wrong reason, you can never call back and clean. He would not spend it on Halleck's. He would have stood there till nightfall before he spent it on Halleck's. They'll talk about this for years, I said. Then they'll talk about the wrong thing, he said, and stood and racked his rifle, and went to write up his post report in his small square hand as though the morning had been entirely unremarkable. It was never about the prince. It was about whose salute it was. I did not understand that evening how completely the city and the prince were about to learn that exact lesson. I thought the story was over. I thought Halleck's would sulk back to Marin, and we would tell the tale in the watch room until it wore smooth. I did not know that the old king of Marin had meant every word of what he'd said at the foot of the steps, and that he was a man who, unlike his son, finished what he started. I did not know that the next morning, before the Marin party left the city, the prince was going to come back to the avenue, and what he was going to do there would be talked about longer than the refusal, and would be the reason I am still able, all these years later, to call that whole bitter morning a good one. It was barely past dawn. The avenue was empty, no crowds, No carriages, no band, only the cleaners with their long brooms and the early light coming flat and gold down the stone. Voss had drawn the same post, the foot of the dais steps, because the sergeant of the watch is a man with a sense of humor and a sense of justice both, and the two had agreed for once. I had the dais corner again. We were not expecting anyone. The official farewell was to be at the river gate at midday, all flags and speeches. There was no reason on earth for a Prince of Marin to be on the State Avenue at dawn. He came on foot, alone, which I think cost him something, because men like Halleck's are rarely alone in their lives. He wore no crown, no sash, none of the morning's finery, just a plain dark traveling coat, the clothes of a man about to leave a place. He came up the avenue slowly, and I saw him stop twice as if turning back and then come on. His father was not with him, but the old King of Marin was standing, I noticed, at the top of the avenue by the river gate, far off, leaning on his chancellor, watching. He had sent his son to do this thing alone. He had only come to be sure it was done. The prince stopped in front of Voss, on the same stone where it had all happened the day before. For a long moment he did not speak. Voss stood his post, eyes forward, exactly as he had the morning before, exactly as he would have for an empty avenue, because to him there was no difference, and that was the whole point. "Guardsmen," the prince said at last. His voice was different. The blotched red was gone. What was left was a young man who had clearly not slept and had clearly been talked to hard by a father he was afraid of and ashamed before. "I came to, my father said I should know." He stopped himself. He took a breath, and when he started again it was his own. "I came because I was wrong, and I would rather say it to you than have my father say it for me." Voss did not move, but I knew that face. I saw it listening. "I demanded a salute I had no right to," the prince said. "I called you a toy soldier. I reached for your colors and you stopped me without hurting me, and you told me the truth in 7 words, and I tried to have you arrested for it." He swallowed. "Where I come from, men jump when I speak. I have never in my life met a man who would not. I thought that meant I was strong. You stood there and would not jump, and you did it without raising your hand or your voice, and I understand now that you are the strongest man I have ever stood in front of, and that I have a great deal to learn." His jaw worked. "My father says a salute cannot be commanded, only earned. I do not expect yours. I have not earned it. But I will not leave this city, having only taken from it." And then Prince Halleck's of the House of Marin, alone on an empty avenue at dawn, with no crowd to perform for and only one old man watching from the river gate, took off his hat and bowed. Not the small, owed bow of a guest. A deep bow, the bow you give a thing you respect, held a long second. The bow a man gives when he means it and is afraid people will think he doesn't mean it enough. He bowed to a sentry. The salute he had screamed for the day before, the honor that was not Voss's to give. He had finally understood it could only go the other way. So he gave it himself, the thing he actually owed, the bow he hadn't earned the right to receive but had every reason to render. Voss could not bow back. He was on post. A sentry does not bow to a passenger, and a prince in a traveling coat is still a passenger. But what he did was, in our service, a far rarer thing than a bow. He brought his eyes down from the middle distance, slowly, deliberately, the only break in his stillness he would permit himself, and for one full second he looked Prince Halleck's directly in the face. He met him, man to man. And in that 1 second he gave the young prince the only thing he had to give from the post, which was to be seen, truly, by the man who would not be commanded. Then his eyes went forward again, and the moment was over, and the prince put his hat back on with hands that were not quite steady, and turned, and walked back down the avenue toward his father and the road home, a smaller and, I think, a better man than the one who had come up it. The old King of Marin did not wait for his son to reach him. He turned and went in through the river gate, satisfied. And the cleaners went back to their brooms, and the gold light climbed the stone, and Aldrin Voss stood his post until he was relieved, and said not one word about any of it, then or after. That was 30 years ago. Aldrin Voss is gone now. He he died as he lived, quietly in his bed, an old guardsman who had spent his whole life refusing to give away the one thing that was never his to give. They do not put up statues for men like him. He would have hated a statue. It would have been a thing that stood on a post forever without ever once being relieved, and he believed deeply that every post must end. But I will tell you what they did do, and it is better than a statue. The story got out the way stories do, and somewhere in the years after, the service began to tell it to the recruits, not as a tale of a humbled prince, though that is the part the city remembered, but as the answer to the only question that matters when you first put on the red tunic and the tall black bearskin and learn to stand. A recruit always asks it, sooner or later. Standing here, hour after hour, taking the insults and the shoving and the cameras and the jeers, what is it for? Why hold when holding costs so much and giving in would cost so little? And the old sergeants tell them about the prince, and the demand, and the 7 quiet words, and the bow at dawn. And then they tell them the thing Aldrin Voss told me on a bench 30 years ago, the thing I have carried ever since and that I will leave you with now, because it is the truest thing I know about the whole of this hard, still, honorable life. The salute is not yours to give. You are only its keeper, and the day you hand it to the wrong man because he is loud or rich or frightened or wearing a crown, that is the day the post is worth nothing, and the day you are no longer a guardsman, but only a man in a costume waiting to be told to jump. Voss never jumped. Not once, not for anyone. And in the end, even the prince took off his hat.